In a village steeped in ancient traditions, Elia, a young healer, stands accused of cursing the chief's son, Malakai. Bound to a ceremonial stake, flames lick at her skin as the crowd watches, thirsting for her death. But as the fire threatens to consume her, the ancient tree at the village's heart begins to stir, its roots pulsing with power. And then, a voice: "The truth will burn brighter than the flames." Morning mist clung to the lush forest surrounding Eldervale village as Elia gathered herbs from her garden, her slender fingers moving with practiced precision. At just 20 summers, she had already earned a reputation as the most gifted healer the village had seen in generations. The dew-kissed Miranda leaves she carefully selected would brew a tea to ease old matron Sira's joint pain, while the purple heartroot would strengthen the blacksmith's weakened heart. Each plant, each remedy was a conversation between Elia and Clay, the ancient wisdom that seemed to flow through her veins. "The fever bark is almost gone," she murmured to herself, her dark eyes scanning the carefully organized bundles hanging from her cottage's wooden rafters. "I'll need to journey to the southern grove before the next full moon." From outside came the sounds of village life awakening: children's laughter, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, merchants calling their wares. But here in Elia's small, healing hut, with its herb-scented air and walls lined with dried plants and clay pots of salves, time seemed to flow differently. More slowly, more purposefully, sunlight streamed through the open window, illuminating the intricate tattoos that wound their way up Elia's forearms, ancient healing symbols passed down through 16 generations of village healers. Unlike the others before her, Elia had not been born to a healer. Her gift had manifested unexpectedly, when as a child of 7 she had placed her hands on a dying fawn and somehow guided its life force back into harmony. A sharp knock at her door broke her concentration. "Healer Elia," called a gruff voice. She recognized immediately as belonging to Gareth, the village chief's most trusted guard. "Your presence is requested at the chief's compound immediately." Elia quickly wiped her hands on her apron, the smell of crushed herbs rising from her fingers. "Has someone fallen ill?" she asked, already reaching for her medicine satchel. "It's the chief's son, Malakai. He woke with strange marks on his skin and a fever that won't break." A flutter of concern passed through Elia. Malakai, the chief's only son and heir, had always been blessed with robust health. Too robust, perhaps, given how he flaunted his strength during the village games, often at the expense of weaker opponents. At 25, he stood to inherit leadership of not just Eldervale, but the entire Northern Valley region. "I'll come at once," she said, gathering essential remedies and placing them carefully in her worn leather satchel. As she stepped outside, villagers parted to let her pass, their expressions a mixture of respect and unease. Despite her 5 years as village healer, many still found her connection to the ancient ways unsettling. The chief's compound rose at the village center, its wooden walls twice the height of any other structure. Guards stood at attention as Elia approached, their spears glinting in the morning sun. Chief Thalon himself waited at the entrance, his imposing frame seeming diminished somehow by worry. "Healer," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "My son's condition worsens by the hour. Our family healer has tried traditional remedies without success." Elia nodded respectfully. "I'll do everything in my power, Chief Thalon." Inside, the chief's quarters were adorned with trophies from hunts and battles, a stark contrast to Elia's simple healing hut. Ceremonial masks and weapons lined the walls, speaking of the chief's illustrious lineage and martial prowess. In the largest chamber, Malakai lay on a bed of furs, his muscular frame racked with tremors. As Elia approached, she immediately noticed the strange markings on his chest and neck, curved lines that seemed to shimmer slightly in the torchlight, unlike any natural rash or illness she had encountered. "When did these appear?" she asked, carefully examining the marks without touching them. "Sometime during the night," answered Cora, the chief's family healer, her voice tight with what might have been concern or perhaps resentment at Elia's summons. At 40 summers, Cora had expected to be named village healer herself before Elia's unexpected gift had emerged. "I've tried poultices of red leaf and salva root, but the marks only spread." Elia closed her eyes, extending her senses in the way only she could do. The air around Malakai seemed to vibrate with wrongness, as if something foreign had embedded itself in his life force. "This is no ordinary illness," she whispered, opening her eyes to find the chief staring at her intently. "Something is interfering with his natural energy. Can you heal him?" Chief Thalen demanded, his voice carrying the weight of command. Before Elia could answer, Malakai's eyes flew open, their usual clear blue now clouded with something dark. "The tree," he gasped, his voice unnaturally deep. "The ancient tree knows who did this." Then his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed into unconsciousness once more. Dawn painted the thatched roofs of Elderwood Village in golden hues as Elia hurried through the narrow paths, her medicine pouch clutched tightly against her side. Whispers followed her like shadows. The chief's son had taken a dramatic turn for the worse during the night. 3 seizures since midnight. Elder Toman's voice carried tension as he met her at the entrance to the chief's compound. "The fever burns through him like wildfire. Nothing the other healers tried has worked." Elia nodded, her face composed despite the gravity. She'd been treating illnesses in this village since she was 12 summers old. Now at 20, her knowledge of healing herbs and ancient remedies surpassed even those 3 times her age. "Has he consumed anything unusual? Traveled to the marshlands?" Her questions came with professional precision as servants parted to let her enter the chief's residence. The smell of sickness hung heavy in the air. "Nothing," Elder Taman replied, following closely. He was in perfect health until 2 days ago. Then the fever came, and with it, the markings. Elia paused mid-step. "Markings? You didn't mention markings before." The grand dwelling's central room had been transformed into a sick room. Chief Mateo sat beside his son's bed, his powerful frame looking somehow diminished by worry. He rose. As Elia entered, desperation replacing his usual stern demeanor. "Healer," he acknowledged, voice hoarse from a night without sleep. "He worsens by the hour." Malakai lay on a bed of finest furs, his muscular body now trembling with chills despite the sweat that soaked his skin. At 22, the chief's son had been the picture of health and vigor, a skilled hunter and warrior whom many young women of the village admired from afar. Elia set her medicine pouch down, her movements methodical and precise. "I need to examine him properly," she stated, not asked. Even the chief knew better than to interfere with a healer's work. As she pulled back the fur coverings, Elia's breath caught in her throat. Dark markings spread across Malakai's chest like branching vines, not bruises or rashes, but something that seemed to move beneath his skin with each labored breath. "When did these appear?" she asked, keeping her voice level despite the alarm rising within her. "Yesterday at sunset," the chief replied. "They've grown since then." Elia reached for her pouch, extracting a small clay pot of salve. The mixture of elderflower, sage, and rare mountain lichen had cured countless fevers under her care. She applied it to Malakai's forehead with practiced precision. His eyes flew open at her touch, not the clear brown she remembered, but clouded with an unnatural milky film. "You," he rasped, voice barely recognizable, "you did this." The chief tensed, but Elia maintained her professional composure. "The fever speaks through him," she explained, continuing her examination. The markings pulsed beneath her fingers as she traced their pattern. This was no natural illness. Elia had studied ancient texts hidden in her grandmother's healing hut, forbidden knowledge of maladies caused by darker forces. These markings matched those described in warnings about curses. "I need moon water and crushed blackroot," she instructed a waiting servant. And bring me the white candles from my stores." Elder Taman exchanged worried glances with the chief. "Those are items used for curse breaking, not healing," he observed, voice low but carrying in the tense room. "Because this is no ordinary sickness," Elia replied, her focus unwavering as she mixed a poultice. "Something unnatural affects him." The word hung in the air, unspoken but understood by all present. Curse. Malakai suddenly convulsed, his back arching impossibly as the markings flared with an eerie bluish light. "She knows," he choked out, pointing a trembling finger at Elia. "She knows because she did this." Whispers erupted from the servants gathered at the doorway. The chief's hand moved to the ceremonial dagger at his belt, his eyes narrowing as he studied the young healer. "I'm trying to help him," Elia stated firmly, applying the poultice to the central marking. But instead of the healing reaction she expected, the mixture hissed and evaporated on contact. Impossible. Her remedies had never failed before. "Dark magic resists healing," Elder Taman murmured, loud enough for all to hear. His gaze fixed on Elia with new suspicion. "I need stronger medicines," Elia insisted, repacking her pouch with swift, efficient movements. "There are herbs in my hut that might counter this." Or perhaps, the chief's voice had turned dangerously quiet, "you go to ensure your curse remains unbroken." Elia's head snapped up, meeting his gaze directly. "I have dedicated my life to healing, Chief Mateo. Why would I harm your son?" Before he could answer, Malakai seized again, this time with such violence that 3 men were needed to hold him down. When the seizure passed, his eyes cleared momentarily. "Rejected her," he gasped, looking directly at his father. "She came to me, wanted me. I refused her advances." The room fell deadly silent as all eyes turned to Elia, whose face had drained of color. The accusation hung in the air like poison. "That's not true," she whispered. But doubt had already taken root in the eyes, watching her outside. Storm clouds gathered unexpectedly in the previously clear sky. The village's ancient tree at the edge of the clearing seemed to shudder, though no wind blew. Dark times were coming to Elderwood Village, and the young healer stood at their center. Morning light filtered through the thatched roof of Elia's healing hut, casting dappled shadows across herbs hanging from the rafters. 3 days had passed since Malakai fell ill, and still his fever raged unbroken. Elia crushed willow bark with practiced precision, her weathered hands working the mortar and pestle with rhythmic determination. The village beyond her door had grown uncomfortably quiet. "They're gathering at the chief's longhouse again," whispered Nima, Elia's young apprentice, peering through the partially open door. "Third meeting since sunrise." Elia continued her work, expression unchanged. The chief fears for his son. Fear makes people gather. Inside the longhouse, Chief Cordon paced before the village elders, his massive frame casting long shadows in the torchlit chamber. "My son weakens by the hour." His voice carried the weight of sleepless nights. "And still we have no answers." Elder Tomas, his weathered face marked by decades of council service, leaned forward on his carved staff. Malakai's symptoms defy natural illness. The markings on his skin appeared overnight with no explanation. "I've seen such markings before," said Hewell, the hunting master, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "When I was a boy, in the northern villages. They called it a blood curse." The assembly erupted in nervous murmurs. Chief Cordon slammed his fist against the central post, silencing the room. Who among us would dare curse the chief's son? In the tense silence that followed, a voice emerged from the back of the gathering. Malakai's personal attendant stepped forward, avoiding the chief's gaze. "My chief, I hesitate to speak of this, but ... He paused, seemingly gathering courage. 2 full moons ago, I observed the healer Elia approach Prince Malakai at the river's edge. She offered him a specially prepared tonic, spoke of her admiration for him." The chief's eyes narrowed. "Continue." The prince rejected her advance, Rather forcefully. Elia's face darkened with something I'd never seen in her before. The attendant glanced around nervously. She gathered her herbs and returned to her hut, muttering something about pride and comeuppance. Outside Elia's hut, the whispers grew bolder as the morning progressed. Villagers passed by, their eyes lingering on her door, conversations falling silent at her approach. Nima returned from the well, water sloshing in her bucket as she hurried inside. "Elia, they're saying terrible things," she gasped, setting down her burden. "About you and Prince Malakai. About her rejection and revenge." Elia's hands stilled over. Her mortar. What rejection? Before Nima could answer, a shadow darkened the doorway. Marek, the village blacksmith, filled the frame, his expression grave. "The council requests your presence, healer, immediately." As Elia gathered her medicinal pouch, whispers from outside drifted through the open window. Always alone, that one. Strange plants no one recognizes. Her grandmother was from the Shadow Islands. The journey to the longhouse felt endless. Villagers who had sought Elia's healing for generations now stepped back as she passed, making secret signs against evil. Children were pulled indoors, doors firmly shut. Inside the council chamber, Chief Cordon's eyes burned with barely contained rage. "Healer, explain yourself." "My son lies dying while strange markings spread across his body. Markings that appeared after your treatments failed." Elia stood tall despite the weight of suspicious glares. "I have done everything within my power to heal Prince Malakai. The markings suggest a malady beyond my experience, but I continue to search for. Is it true you approached my son with romantic intentions?" The chief's question cut through the chamber like a blade. Elia's eyes widened. "Never, my chief. I have treated Prince Malakai since his birth, nothing more." Elder Thomas stepped forward, holding a small leather pouch. "This was found buried beneath your healing altar. Do you deny it contains bones and blood?" "That contains crushed river pearls and red clay for drawing infection," Elia replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "A remedy taught by my grandmother." "Your grandmother from the Shadow Islands," someone murmured from the crowd. As if summoned by the mounting tension, the village witch hunter Dagan appeared at the longhouse entrance, his arrival perfectly timed. The tall, gaunt man's eyes fixed on Elia with calculated interest. "I was called from 3 villages away," his voice slithered through the chamber. "Reports of unnatural illness. Markings appearing without cause. Remedies that worsen rather than heal." He circled Elia slowly. "And a healer whose practices differ from tradition." Elder Mara, the oldest of the council, raised her hand. "Elia has served this village faithfully for 15 years. We cannot rush to dark conclusions." But Elia could see it in their eyes. Suspicion taking root, spreading like the mysterious markings on Malakai's skin. Outside, the gathering crowd whispered her name with growing fear. Inside, the chief watched her with the desperate rage of a father losing his only son. The witch hunter's thin lips curved into something resembling a smile. "I shall require access to the healer's hut, all her possessions, all her remedies. The truth will reveal itself." As guards positioned themselves at Elia's sides, she realized with chilling clarity that healing Malakai might no longer be enough to save herself. Dawn breaks over Elderwood village as a crowd gathers outside Elia's healing hut. Torches flicker in the morning mist, casting long shadows across faces twisted with fear and anger. The young healer stands in her doorway, confusion evident in her tired eyes. 3 days since Malakai fell ill, and the whispers have grown into shouts. "Step aside," Chief Turan's voice cuts through the murmurs, his massive frame parting the crowd like a stone through water. His face, normally kind despite its weathered lines, now hardens with something Elia has never seen directed at her before. Hatred. "Chief Turan, please." Elia steps forward, herb-stained hands outstretched. "I've been preparing a new tincture that might help Malakai." If you'll just— Silence! His voice echoes across the clearing. Behind him, Elder David moves forward, his ceremonial staff striking the ground with each step. Elia, daughter of Marilyn, you stand accused of practicing dark magic against the chief's son and heir to our village. The accusation hangs in the air like poison. Gasps ripple through the crowd as Elia's face drains of color. That's not possible, she whispers. I'm a healer. I only use the ancient ways to— The ancient ways? A new voice cuts in. Master Reeve, the witch hunter from the northern villages, steps forward. His black cloak flows behind him, embroidered with symbols meant to ward off evil. Interesting you should mention those. He produces a leather satchel and empties its contents onto the ground before the gathering. Dried herbs, crystals, and small animal bones scatter across the dirt. These were found hidden beneath the floorboards of your healing hut. Elia's eyes widen. Those aren't mine. I've never seen. I helped search her dwelling, Cora announces, the older healer's voice carrying authority. Once Elia's mentor, now her greatest rival since the village began to prefer the young woman's gentler remedies. We also found this. From her pocket, Cora produces a small doll made of twisted reeds. Around its neck hangs a piece of fabric, unmistakably torn from Malakai's ceremonial tunic. A binding doll, Master Reeve pronounces, lifting it for all to see. Made to channel dark magic directly into its victim. The crowd surges forward, held back only by the village guards. Elia feels the world spinning around her. I didn't make that. Please, you must believe me. From the back of the crowd, a woman screams. My child's fever began the day after Elia gave him medicine. My crops failed after she walked along their edge. Another voice joins. She speaks to the plants. I've heard her in the forest at night. Chief Toran raises his hand, silencing the growing accusations. Elia, 3 nights ago, did my son reject your romantic advances during the harvest celebration? The question strikes her like a physical blow. There were no advances, she stammers, feeling the trap closing around her. We spoke briefly about the medicinal properties of witnesses say otherwise, Elder David interrupts. They report seeing him laugh at you before walking away. And now he lies dying, Chief Toran's voice breaks, with markings no natural illness could cause. Master Reeve circles Elia like a predator. The evidence is clear. Rejection, opportunity, unnatural items, and knowledge of the ancient ways, as she calls them. Did you curse the boy because he wounded your pride? Did his rejection sting so badly you turned to darker powers? No. Elia tries to pull away, but village guards grab her arms. I would never harm anyone. I've dedicated my life to healing. Take her to the holding cell, Chief Toran commands, unable to look at the young woman who once saved his wife's life during a difficult childbirth. The council will convene at midday to determine her punishment. As they drag her away, Elia notices something strange, a small smile playing at the corners of Cora's mouth before the older healer carefully arranges her face into an appropriate mask of concern. Please, Elia calls out desperately, check. The ancient tree. The spirits there will confirm my innocence. The spirits? Master Reeve laughs coldly. She admits to communing with spirits. What further evidence do we need? The villagers, people she's healed and helped since she was old enough to gather herbs, look away as she's pulled toward the stone cell beneath the council hall. Only old woman Marta watches with troubled eyes, clutching a protective amulet Elia. Once made for her dot in the chief's dwelling, Malakai twists in fevered agony, strange markings spreading across his chest like dark roots. Outside, clouds gather unnaturally fast over the ancient tree at the edge of the village, its leaves trembling, though no wind blows. The accusation has been made. The next phase has begun. And somewhere in the forest beyond the village, something ancient and powerful begins to stir. Chief Warwick sat upon his wooden throne, his expression carved from stone as he watched the young healer. Malakai's condition had worsened overnight, his skin now covered with strange markings that pulsed with an eerie blue light. The village physician stood helplessly at his bedside, while Elia, the one person who might understand these symptoms, faced judgment for causing them. "Bring forth the evidence," Chief Warwick's voice carried across the suddenly silent gathering. Elder Thomas stepped forward, holding a wooden box containing items taken from Elia's healing hut. These were found hidden beneath her floorboards. The elder announced, his voice heavy with disapproval. He lifted a small cloth bag, untying it carefully. Bones of a black crow, known to carry death's message. Next came a vial of dark liquid. Blood mixed with nightshade and ghost root. Finally, a small doll crafted from twigs, wrapped with strands of hair. "And this, bearing the hair of your son, Chief Warwick." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elia's eyes widened in genuine shock. "Those aren't mine. I've never seen those items before." Her protest fell on deaf ears as the crowd's whispers grew louder. From the edge of the gathering, Cora, the rival healer from the neighboring village, stepped forward. Her dark eyes fixed on Elia with cold precision. "I've seen such items before," she declared, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "In the Northern Territories, where dark magic practitioners use them to cast illness upon their enemies." Elia's heart pounded against her ribs as she recognized the calculated move. Cora had visited her hut 3 days ago, asking to borrow herbs for a sick child. She was in my home. She could have planted these things. "Silence!" Chief Warwick pounded his staff against the wooden platform. "Cora has helped many in our region. What reason would she have to harm my son?" "I have no quarrel with your family, Chief." Cora bowed respectfully, her performance flawless. "I came only because I recognized the symptoms when I heard of them. They match the curse of wasting death." Elder Tomas produced a worn leather tome. "Our ancestors documented such curses. The markings, the fever that resists treatment, the pain that moves like fire through the body." He turned weathered pages until finding the passage. "All signs point to deliberate magic worked against your son." Elia struggled against her bonds, desperation mounting. "I heal with herbs and knowledge passed down through generations. I don't practice dark magic. Please, let me examine Malakai again. I might see something I missed." The village witch hunter, Barak, moved to stand beside the chief. His tall frame and scarred face inspired immediate silence. "I've examined the boy myself. These are not natural markings." He turned to face Elia directly. "Did he reject you, girl? Is that why you cursed him?" The question hit like a physical blow. 2 months ago, Malakai had indeed spurned her affections publicly, but Elia had long since moved past the humiliation. Before she could respond, a woman from the crowd shouted, "I saw her gathering herbs by moonlight near the Forbidden Marsh." "She spoke to the birds as if they understood her," called another. "My cow gave sour milk after she looked at it," a farmer added. The accusations multiplied, years of unexplained misfortunes suddenly attributed to the young healer. Elia looked around desperately for any friendly face, finding none. Even those she had healed turned away, fear overwhelming gratitude. "Chief." Warwick raised his hand for silence. "I have heard enough. Elia, healer of the eastern woods, you stand accused of practicing dark magic and casting a death curse upon my son and heir." His voice hardened. "How do you answer these charges?" "I am innocent," Elia stated, her voice finding strength despite her fear. "I have only ever sought to heal, not harm. Whatever afflicts Malakai, I did not cause it." She locked eyes with Cora briefly, seeing the faintest smile play at the corners of the rival healer's mouth. The chief conferred briefly with the elders before rising to his feet. The crowd held its collective breath. The evidence speaks clearly. The testimony confirms what the evidence suggests. His voice rang with finality. "Elia, You are found guilty of witchcraft and attempted murder through cursecraft." A cry of anguish escaped Elia's lips as the crowd erupted in shouts. The chief raised his voice above the chaos. "There is only one way to break such a curse and cleanse our village. At sunset today, Elia will be burned at the stake. Her death will break the curse upon my son." The guards moved forward, dragging Elia toward the village prison, little more than a reinforced shed used rarely for drunken disturbances. As they pushed her inside, Elia caught sight of the ancient tree at the edge of the village square. For a moment, she thought she saw its leaves trembling despite the still air, its bark seeming to glow with a faint inner light. The door slammed shut, plunging her into darkness as outside. Villagers began gathering wood for the pyre. Morning. Sun cast long shadows across the village square as Elia was led to the ceremonial stake, her wrists bound with coarse rope that cut into her skin. Village guardsmen flanked her on both sides, their faces masks of stern determination. The crowd parted silently before them, villagers who once sought Elia's healing touch, now watching with a mixture of fear and righteous anger. Chief Taman stood on the raised platform, his ornate staff of office gleaming in the sunlight, his son Malakai propped up beside him, too weak to stand unassisted, skin bearing the unnatural markings of the curse. For the crime of witchcraft against the chief's son and heir, the village elder announced, his voice carrying across the now silent gathering. Elia the healer is sentenced to purification by fire, to break the curse and cleanse our village of dark magic. The elder's ceremonial robes fluttered in the morning breeze, adorned with protective symbols hastily added after Malakai's affliction began. Elia's eyes scanned the crowd, searching for any sympathetic face, any ally who might speak up. She found none. Even those she had healed turned away, fear of association overwhelming their gratitude. The rival healer Cora stood near the front, her face a perfect mask of sorrow that didn't reach her eyes. "I am innocent," Elia called out, her voice steady. Despite her terror, the markings on Malakai are from forest root poisoning, not a curse. "Please let me prove it." The guardsmen tightened their grip, pushing her forward toward the stake rising from a carefully arranged pile of wood and kindling. Chief Taman stepped forward, his face hardened with grief and anger. "My son wastes away while you spin lies. The witch hunter has confirmed your guilt. The markings are those of ancient curses, not natural illness." He turned to the gathered villagers. "Let all see what becomes of those who practice dark magic in our lands." Rough hands secured Elia to the stake, the ropes wound tight around her body. The witch hunter approached with a ceremonial torch, its flame dancing hungrily in the morning air. "Confess your dark deeds, and your passing will be quick," he offered, his voice carrying the practiced tone of one who had done this many times. "Before, I have nothing to confess," Elia responded, lifting her chin despite the terror clawing at her chest. "I am a healer, not a witch." Her eyes locked with Cora's, and for a moment, she saw something there, a flicker of satisfaction quickly masked. The witch hunter signaled to his apprentice, who approached with a vial of oil. "To ensure the cleansing fire takes hold," he explained to the chief as the liquid was poured around the base of the pyre. The scent of pine and strange herbs rose with the fumes, making Elia's head swim. As the torch descended toward the kindling, Elia closed her eyes and whispered the ancient healer's prayer to the spirits of the forest. The first flames licked at the wood, crackling as they gained strength. Heat rose around her, the smoke beginning to sting her eyes and throat. Suddenly, the ancient oak tree at the edge of the village square, a tree said to have stood since the village's founding, creaked and groaned, its massive branches swaying despite the still air. Villagers turned in alarm, murmurs spreading through the crowd. Dark clouds gathered with unnatural speed, blotting out the morning sun. "The witch summons a storm," someone cried, panic rippling through the gathering. "No," the eldest village woman responded, her voice cutting through the Chaos. The Ancient One speaks. She pointed a gnarled finger at the ancient oak, whose bark now seemed to ripple like water. The first drops of rain fell as the flames reached Elia's feet, sizzling against her skin. She cried out in pain, the sound drowned by a sudden crack of thunder that shook the very ground. Lightning split the sky, striking not the village but the ancient oak tree itself. Instead of splintering, the tree absorbed the lightning, its trunk now glowing with an inner light. The rain intensified, dousing the flames that had begun to consume the pyre. Village guardsmen stepped back, weapons drawn but uncertain where to point them. Through the curtain of rain, the ancient oak's bark split open, revealing not wood but a luminous interior that pulsed like a heartbeat. A voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere spoke, its tone resonating in the bones of all who heard it. "Injustice," the voice pronounced, the word echoing across the square. "The innocent burns while the guilty watches." Chief Tamman staggered back, his staff of office falling from nerveless fingers. Malakai collapsed, the markings on his skin glowing in response to the tree's light. The witch hunter reached for protective amulets, his face pale with fear. Tried to slip away, but vines erupted from the ground at her feet, rooting her in place. Her eyes widened in genuine terror as the ancient oak's glow intensified, bathing the entire village square in otherworldly light. The ropes binding Elia to the stake unraveled of their own accord, and she fell forward, her legs unable to support her after the flame's touch. Village guardsmen stood frozen, torn between their duty to the chief and the undeniable power manifesting before them. "The tree has watched since before your father's fathers," the voice continued, each word shaking leaves from the surrounding trees. "It knows the truth." A beam of light extended from the glowing tree, touching Elia's burned feet. Where it connected, her injuries began to fade, the angry red of burns replaced by healthy skin. Another beam struck Malakai, illuminating the strange markings on his skin, making them visible to all, symbols not of healing but of ancient forbiddance. Magic that no village healer would know. The final beam encompassed Cora, lifting her struggling form into the air, the contents of her pockets spilling to the ground, vials, twisted roots, and a doll bearing Malakai's likeness, pierced with thorns. "Behold the true curse-caster," the voice pronounced as villagers gasped at the evidence. The rain continued to fall, extinguishing the last embers of the pyre as Elia rose to her feet, her eyes reflecting the ancient tree's light, her destiny. Forever changed by fire and truth, the ancient tree's massive trunk shuddered as flames lit at Elia's feet. Villagers gasped, stepping back as bark cracked with sounds like bones breaking. No ordinary movement this. The ancient guardian was awakening for the first time in 7 generations. Chief Mako raised his hand, confusion replacing certainty. "Stop the execution," he commanded, but his warriors hesitated, transfixed by the spectacle unfolding before them. Too late anyway. The flames had already taken hold. Elia's screams cut through the village square as fire consumed her simple healer's dress. Her eyes, once soft with compassion, now wide with terror, locked onto the ancient tree. Something was happening. Something impossible. The tree's bark split open with a thunderous crack, revealing pulsing amber light from within. Not fire, something older, something alive. Villagers dropped to their knees, weapons forgotten as ancient magic manifested before them. "I have witnessed," a voice boomed, seeming to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. Not human, not animal. Something primordial. The voice of the forest itself. Rain intensified, dousing the execution pyre. Steam hissed upward as droplets struck hot coals. Elia collapsed, her body slumping against restraints, burns already forming on her exposed skin. "This child is innocent," the ancient tree proclaimed, its voice shaking the very ground. "Witness the truth." The amber light expanded, enveloping the entire village square. Within it, images formed, memories projected from the tree's ancient consciousness. Every villager saw it. Cora, the rival healer, gathering forbidden roots. Under moonlight, her jealous face twisted with purpose as she wove dark magic. Malakai's cup, the poison, the curse. The plot. I have seen all. The tree's voice softened, but remained unmistakably powerful. I have witnessed 7 generations of this village. I have watched Elia since she first touched healing herbs. Her heart is pure. Her magic is light. Chief Mako staggered forward, one hand extended toward the dying flames around Elia. Great Guardian, I have made a terrible mistake, he whispered, voice breaking. Rain plastered his ceremonial feathers against his head, washing away the paint of judgment. From his face, mistakes can be undone. Death cannot, the tree responded, its bark beginning to pulse with rhythmic light. This healer must live. Elder Tama, the village's most respected woman, rushed forward through the rain. Cut her down, she ordered, pulling a knife from her belt. 2 warriors moved instantly, slicing through Elia's bindings. The young healer collapsed into Elder Tama's arms, her breathing shallow, burns angry red against her usually golden skin. She needs immediate treatment, Tama announced, already assessing the damage with experienced hands. Bring her to Me, the ancient tree commanded. Villagers parted as Elder Tama and the warriors carried Elia's limp form toward the glowing tree. The rain continued, but strangely, not a drop fell upon their procession. What of my son? Chief Mako cried out, his voice desperate. If Elia is innocent, Malakai remains cursed. The tree's light pulsed brighter. The true culprit must be brought. Before me, the one called Cora has awakened powers beyond her understanding. From the back of the crowd, a scream erupted. Villagers turned to see Cora, face contorted with rage and fear, attempting to flee. The witch hunter, her secret ally, was already disappearing into the forest shadows. Seize her, Chief Mako ordered. Warriors moved with practiced precision, surrounding the fleeing healer before she could escape. At the ancient tree, Elder Tama gently laid Elia at its roots. The amber light enveloped her burned body immediately. Great Guardian, Tama whispered, can you heal her? The tree's answer came not in words, but in action. Roots gently emerged from the ground, cradling Elia's form. The light intensified around her wounds. She will live, the tree pronounced, and through her, the truth shall heal this village. Behind them, Cora was brought forward, struggling against her captors. The rain suddenly stopped. A terrible reckoning was about to begin. The ancient tree's roots pulsed with ethereal light as the final vision faded from the air above the village center. Rain continued to fall, steam rising where drops hit the still smoldering stake. Elia lay crumpled on the ground, her clothes charred, her skin reddened with burns, but miraculously alive. The gathered villagers stood frozen, their faces pale with the terrible truth the tree had revealed. It was Cora, the chief whispered, his voice breaking the stunned silence. Cora cursed my son. The crowd parted as all eyes turned toward the rival healer, who stood rigid at the edge of the gathering. Cora's face, moments ago twisted in righteous accusation, now drained of color. Lies, she hissed, backing away. The tree speaks falsely. The girl has bewitched it too. The ancient tree's voice rumbled like distant thunder, its words forming in the minds of all present. I who have stood since the first settlers cannot speak falsely. I have witnessed all. Another vision shimmered into existence above the village center. Cora, beneath the light of a blood moon, mixing dark powders with water from a stagnant pool. The bark of a withered tree. The fang of a venomous snake. Herbs that no proper healer would touch. See how she gathered the forbidden ingredients. Elder Tomas gasped, his eyes wide with horror. The blackened rivroot that grows only in poisoned soil. The vision shifted, showing Cora slipping into the chief's home during a celebration feast. She found Malakai's drinking cup and sprinkled the dark powder with careful precision while whispering words in an ancient, forbidden tongue. "Blood of my hatred, seed of my vengeance," the vision Cora whispered. "Let the son of my enemy wither. Like autumn leaves, let him suffer for his father's sins." The crowd gasped as the vision showed more Cora meeting secretly with the witch hunter days before Malakai fell ill, gold-changing hands, whispered conspiracies. "She planned this," the chief's voice broke through the murmurs. "She planned it. All." Cora's face contorted with rage as she backed toward the forest edge. "He deserved it. Your precious son, who thinks himself above all others. Your family, who took everything from mine generations ago." The witch hunter tried to slip away in the confusion, but village hunters blocked his path. "You were paid well." "Inquisitor," Elder Tomas said, examining the man with newfound clarity. "How many innocent healers have you condemned to enrich yourself?" Amidst the chaos, the chief knelt beside his son, who had been brought to witness Elia's execution. Malakai's skin now bore black veins, spreading from his chest toward his throat, his breathing shallow and labored. "The curse strengthens." The ancient tree's voice resonated. "With each passing hour, the dark magic takes deeper root. By dawn, I too will reach his heart." The village healer who had replaced Elia approached cautiously. I don't know how to counter such dark magic. This is beyond my skills." Cora laughed, a hollow sound devoid of warmth. "Of course you can't cure him. No one can. I bound the curse to the dark spirits of the Forgotten Grove. Each failed healing attempt only strengthens their hold. There must be a way," the chief pleaded, looking toward the ancient tree. "There is one," the tree responded, its roots still glowing with ancient power. "But it requires the skills of a true healer, one connected to the old ways." All eyes turned to Elia, still lying injured where she had fallen. "How can we ask for her help?" Someone in the crowd called out, "We just tried to burn her alive." The ancient tree's branches swayed despite the lack of wind. "The choice must be hers." The village healers carefully approached Elia, treating her burns with trembling hands. Her eyes fluttered open, filled with pain but also an ancient wisdom that hadn't been there before. "I saw it all through the tree's vision," she whispered. "I understand now. Can you save my son?" The chief asked, pride abandoned in the face of his child's suffering. "I can try," Elia said, struggling to sit up, "but we must hurry." The curse Cora cast draws power from hatred and vengeance. It grows stronger with each passing moment. Cora sneered from where village hunters now held her. "You'll fail. The dark spirits answer only to me. I spent years earning their trust while you played with your simple healing herbs." "Silence her," the chief commanded, and Cora was dragged away, still hurling threats and curses. The witch hunter, exposed and disgraced, was bound alongside her dad Elia, supported by those who had condemned her just hours before, looked toward the ancient tree. "I'll need ingredients that grow only in your shadow," she said, "and something more. Something only you can provide." "You shall have what you need," the tree responded. "But make haste. The curse feeds on the boy's life force. His time grows short." As villagers helped Elia to her feet, the full weight of their terrible mistake hung heavy in the air. They had nearly killed the only person who could save them. Driven by fear and manipulation, the ancient tree's roots continued to pulse with light, illuminating the path forward. The true battle was just beginning, and Elia, despite her injuries, would need to summon strength she didn't know she possessed to counter the dark magic that threatened to claim the chief's son. Dawn painted the village in shades of gold as Elia's trembling hands gathered what remained of her healing supplies. Burns covered her arms where the flames had kissed her skin before the ancient tree's intervention. Each movement sent pain shooting through her body, but determination burned stronger than any fire could. "You should rest," Elder Tamara urged, applying a soothing salve to Elia's wounds. "Your body needs time to heal." "Malakai doesn't have time," Elia replied, her voice hoarse from smoke. "The curse is reaching its final stage. By sunset, his spirit will be permanently separated from his body." The same villagers who had condemned her now watched in silence as she packed her medicine bag. The irony wasn't lost on her, saving the son of the man who had ordered her execution. But healing wasn't about worthiness. It was about balance. The ancient tree had shown them all the truth. Korah, the village's elder healer, had cursed Malakai in jealousy after the chief had begun to favor Elia's remedies. The elaborate curse required 3 sacred herbs that grew only in the Shadow Marsh, a place no one dared enter. No one except Elia. "I'll need moonflower, serpent's tongue, and tears of the mist," Elia explained to Tamara. "All grow in the marsh's center." "That's a full day's journey," the chief protested, his voice lacking its usual authority. Guilt had hollowed his cheeks and darkened the skin beneath his eyes. "My son will be gone by then." Elia met his gaze without flinching. "Not if the ancient tree helps us." As if summoned by her words, a low rumble shook the ground. Outside, the massive tree that had saved Elia's life was moving, roots pulled from deep earth as the ancient trunk bent forward. The villagers scattered in terror, but Elia walked toward it with reverence. "Great Guardian," she whispered, "will you help me reach the Shadow Marsh?" The tree's bark split open, revealing a hollow large enough for a person. Inside, a soft green light pulsed like a heartbeat. Korah spat on the ground. "They never respected our ways. The chief began consulting you first, a mere girl. When his son rejected my daughter for marriage, it was the final insult. The curse was meant for both of them, the arrogant prince and the girl who thought herself better than tradition. Bind her," the chief commanded. "She faced judgment when my son is healed." Elia didn't wait to see Korah restrained. The marsh plants would wither quickly once picked. Every moment was precious. She stepped into the ancient tree's hollow, feeling warm bark close around her like an embrace. Darkness enveloped her as the tree pulled her deep into the earth. Then, a network of glowing roots illuminated a path no human eyes had seen for generations. The tree was taking her through the underworld paths, shortcuts, through the very fabric of the forest. The journey that should have taken hours passed in minutes. When the bark opened again, Elia found herself standing at the edge of Shadow Marsh, its mist-covered surface glowing under the midday sun. "Thank you," she whispered, placing her palm against the tree's ancient wood. Gathering the needed plants proved more challenging than reaching the marsh. Each step sent pain through her burned legs, and the fresh knife wound throbbed with every heartbeat. Shadow Marsh earned its name from the darting shadows that moved beneath the water, spirits that sought to drag the living down into the muck. The moonflower grew on rotting logs in the marsh's center, their silver petals closing as Elia's fingers touched them. Serpent's tongue plants hissed when she harvested their red leaves. The tears of the mist were hardest, crystallized dew that formed only where light and shadow met perfectly. As she collected the final crystal tear, a shadow larger than the others rose from the water. The spirit took shape, a woman with hollow eyes and dripping hair. "Healer," the spirit whispered, "your mercy will be your undoing. The boy you save will one day be chief. How do you know he deserves your sacrifice?" Elia straightened despite her pain. "It's not about what people deserve. Healing is about restoring balance." The spirit studied her for a long moment. "The old ways speak through you. Take this." A ghostly hand extended, offering a small glowing stone. "Add it to your remedy. It will cleanse not just his body, but his heart." Elia took the stone, feeling its cold energy pulse against her palm. "Thank you." The ancient tree awaited her return. Roots extended to guide her back to the village where Malakai lay pale as death on a bed of ceremonial furs. The healing circle was prepared, 12 stones placed around the chief's son, villagers standing ready with hands linked. The sun was already kissing the western mountains. They had minutes, not hours. Elia crushed the marsh plants between ceremonial stones, adding the spirit's gift last. As the mixture turned from green to brilliant blue, she knew they still had a chance to save the boy who had unwittingly started this chain of events, and to begin healing the village's deeper wounds. "We begin now," she announced, her voice stronger than her battered body should allow. "Let us call back what darkness has stolen." Dawn broke over the village as Elia knelt beside Malakai's bed, her hands trembling from exhaustion. 3 days had passed since she'd begun the counter-curse ritual, her body still bearing the burn marks from her near execution. The mixture of ancient herbs and sacred water from the ancient tree glowed faintly in the wooden bowl as she applied the final poultice to the chief's son's forehead. "It's time," she whispered, her voice hoarse from chanting healing incantations. Through the night, the gathered villagers watched in tense silence as Elia placed her hands over Malakai's chest, the mysterious markings that had covered his body now fading under her touch. The chief stood at the foot of the bed, his proud face now lined with shame and regret. "Will he survive?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Elia didn't answer, her focus entirely on the healing ritual. The ancient tree's wisdom flowed through her fingers, her connection to the old magic stronger than ever before. Where once she had practiced healing through simple herbs and poultices, now she channeled something far more powerful, the living essence of the forest itself. Malakai's body suddenly arched upward, a blinding light emanating from beneath Elia's palms. The dark tendrils of Korra's curse became visible, writhing like serpents as they were drawn out of his body. With a final burst of energy that nearly depleted her remaining strength, Elia pulled the dark magic free, capturing it in the sacred bowl where it dissolved into harmless smoke. "It is done," Elia announced, collapsing backward into the arms of Elder Toma, the only council member who had spoken in her defense during the trial. Malakai's eyes fluttered open, clarity returning to them for the first time in weeks. The chief fell to his knees, tears streaming down his weathered face. "My son," he whispered, clutching Malakai's hand. Then, turning to Elia, "And you whom I condemned without justice, you have saved him." Outside, the village had gathered in the square, the same place where days before they had tried to burn Elia alive. Now they awaited news of the chief's son, their faces showing the heavy burden of collective guilt. "He will live," Elder Toma announced from the doorway, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. A relieved murmur passed through the gathering, but no celebration followed. They understood the weight of what they had done. 3 days later, when Elia had regained enough strength to walk, the chief called the entire village to the ancient tree. The massive oak's bark still showed the supernatural split that had occurred during Elia's execution, though it had partially healed, forming what appeared to be a face within the wood. "Today we acknowledge a grave injustice," the chief began, his voice carrying authority even in humility. "We allowed fear and superstition to blind us. We condemned an innocent healer who has served this village faithfully, and we nearly took her life." He turned to where Korra stood, bound and guarded, her alliance with dark spirits now fully exposed by the ancient tree's visions. "True justice must now be served," the chief continued, "but it will not be through fire or hasty judgment. The council of elders will determine Korra's punishment, guided by the wisdom of the ancient tree and our traditions of mercy alongside justice." Elia stepped forward, her burns still visible on her arms, yet her eyes showed no hatred. "The ancient tree has taught us that healing must come not just for our bodies, but for our community," she addressed the gathered villagers. "I will establish a new healing tradition here, one that honors the ancient ways while teaching discernment and wisdom. As she spoke, the ancient tree began to glow once more, its branches extending toward Elia. Leaves and blossoms fell around her, transforming into a glowing mantle that settled on her shoulders. The villagers gasped as the tree's magic visibly entered Elia, healing her burn scars completely. "The tree has chosen," Elder Toma announced in awe. "Elia is now keeper of the ancient wisdom." The chief knelt before Elia, offering her his ceremonial staff. "My authority is diminished by my failure of judgment," he said. "From this day forward, no punishment shall be enacted without the counsel of the keeper of ancient wisdom. Our laws will be tempered with the healing knowledge you possess." Elia accepted the staff, placing it against the ancient tree where it took root, becoming a living branch. "Not a symbol of punishment," she explained, "but a reminder that justice and healing must grow together." In the months that followed, the village transformed. The execution stake was dismantled, replaced by a healing garden where Elia taught apprentices the ancient ways. Children who once feared the mysterious healer now gathered eagerly for her lessons on the language of plants and the wisdom of the forest. And the ancient tree continued to watch over them all, its face in the bark, smiling slightly as balance returned to the village it had protected for countless generations.